The moment the cicada's chirping pierced my ears, a thin layer of sweat broke out on my back. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the plane tree leaves, scattering like fragments of gold onto the cement ground beside the basketball court. I stood at the outermost edge of the crowd, clutching a pinkish-blue envelope in my right hand. The paper beneath my fingers was wrinkled from the grip, and my heartbeat thumped loudly against my eardrums. In front of me stood Ethan. A white shirt, black pants, the stray strands of his hair lifted slightly by the wind. He looked down at me, the corner of his mouth curved into that gentle smile I had been infatuated with for a full 4 years in my past life. The noise of cheers and teasing surged around us, and my roommate Camilla gave me a push from behind, her voice syrupy sweet. "Go on, you've been preparing for this for so long, haven't you?" I blinked, then blinked again. Reborn. Truly reborn. Back to the summer after the college entrance exam when I was 18, back to this afternoon when I confessed my feelings to Ethan. The past life is like a river, I can see every stone at the bottom, but through the water, some details are slowly blurring. Yet every single frame of this day is carved into my bones. The moment these words leave my mouth, Ethan will smile and take the letter, say let's give it a try, then for the next 4 years, he'll use my family background, my sincerity, everything I have, stepping on my shoulders to climb into high society. Finally, on the day my family goes bankrupt, he'll appear before me with Camilla on his arm, and say lightly, "Vivian, you were too naive." I looked at Ethan. He was still smiling, but that smile, in my eyes, suddenly seemed like an exquisite mask of human skin. Just as I tightened my grip on the letter and was about to speak. "String her along first, get the resources, then we'll see." A cold, mechanical voice, clear as day, came from Ethan's direction, piercing directly into my mind. I froze. Camilla was still behind me, whining in her syrupy voice, "Vivian, if you don't speak up soon, it'll be dark already." I turned around. Camilla was wearing a goose yellow dress, her hair loosely braided into a side plate, with delicate, natural-looking makeup on her face. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at me, full of the sincere, "Go for it, sis," encouragement. Then I heard a second voice, sharper, meaner than Ethan's, "Go on, say it already. Once she posts this, Nathaniel will see how well I hang out with the socialite circle. Oh, and make sure to film her when she cries later. We can use it if they ever break up." A chill crept into my fingertips. Not from fear, it was a kind of nausea that comes after sobering up. Slowly, I lifted the pink-blue letter, holding it with both hands, tearing the paper apart right in front of Ethan's expectant gaze and Camilla's subtle attempt to raise her phone. Rip. The crisp sound of tearing was especially jarring in the quiet afternoon. Ethan's smile froze at the corners of his mouth. Camilla's hand holding her phone paused mid-air. The 7 or 8 classmates gathered around fell silent instantly. I folded the torn halves of the letter together again, tore them again, and again, until the shredded pieces fell like snowflakes all over the floor. Then I looked up, smiled slightly at Ethan's mildly stunned face. "Sorry," I said, brushing the paper scraps off my hands, my voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I thought it over and decided you don't deserve this letter." Ethan's expression looked as if he had been slapped. He opened his mouth, but I couldn't be bothered to hear what he was thinking anymore. As I turned to leave, Camilla grabbed my arm, her voice tinged with just the right amount of anxiety and confusion. "Vivian, what's wrong? Don't you like Ethan a lot? Are you just too nervous and talking nonsense?" I shook off her hand and turned my head to look at her face, the face of my best friend whom I had spent 4 years in my past life trying to read without ever truly understanding. "Camilla," I said softly, "you've been holding your phone up for so long. Doesn't your arm ache?" Camilla's face went pale instantly. I didn't turn back as I walked out of the crowd. The scorching gaze on my back belonged to Ethan, and all around me, whispers rippled like waves. The sun burned the top of my head, but every pore in my body screamed one thought: this life, I, Vivian, would take back everything that was owed to me in the last one by one. Just as I turned the corner around the lab building, I collided head-on with someone. A firm chest, the faint scent of cedarwood, and an extremely low, deep TCH. I stepped back 2 paces and looked up. Silhouetted against the light stood a tall boy, dressed in a simple black t-shirt with sleeves rolled to mid-forearm, revealing the smooth lines of his wrist bones. He looked down at me, his features as cold as if carved from a knife, thin lips pressed together, his eyes devoid of emotion. I recognized him. Or rather, in my past life, I knew of him. Nathaniel, the top figure in Ethan's circle, the only son of the Zhou family, one of the most powerful clans in the capital. He kept such a low profile that he barely appeared in public. The only connection between us in my past life was once at a drinking party, when Ethan muttered sourly, "Someone like Nathaniel thinks he's above everyone else, he wouldn't even show my father any respect." I sidestepped, trying to get around him. Then I heard a third voice. Low, as if filtered through something, coming from this silent boy. "Crying? Not my problem." His gaze didn't shift away right away. Another half-second passed, tearing up that letter, though, not quite what the rumors made it out to be. I paused in my steps. In my past life, I never knew until the very end that during that summer when everyone was scheming against me, someone had passed me by and taken a second glance. That voice was clean and straightforward, carrying a hint of reluctance, as if to say, none of my business, but I couldn't help looking again. I started walking again. Without looking back. That evening, slumped over my desk, I stared at the 17 unread messages on my phone screen from Camilla and slowly curled my lips into a cold sneer. Vivian, what's wrong with you? You scared me to death today. Are you feeling too stressed? Want me to go out for a walk with you? Ethan kept looking at you the whole time. He actually cares about you a lot. Each message was accompanied by a pitiful emoji. I didn't reply to a single one and directly switched to WeChat moments. Sure enough. At 3:17 p.m., Camilla posted something visible to everyone except me, a secret I'd accidentally discovered in my past life. Back then, she had set it to hide from Vivian, and I only saw it by borrowing someone else's phone. The post featured a selfie of her grinning at the camera with a peace sign, and in the blurred background, you could see the back of me tearing up a letter. The caption reads, "Today I went with my bestie to help her confess, but she chickened out at the last minute. I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Still, girls should always love themselves." Some mutual friends had already commented below, "Camilla, you're so sweet, what a shame for your bestie." Camilla replied to all of them with a shy emoji. I stared at that post for half a minute, then suddenly burst out laughing. How did I ever believe her for 4 years in my past life? In front of me, she was always the best sister. Behind my back, she used my embarrassing moments as social currency. In the end, when my family's trade secrets were leaked and I cried asking her why, she stood before me in her high heels, that delicate face full of mockery. "Vivian, you didn't actually think I wanted to be friends with you, did you? If your family didn't have money, who would even bother with you?" The phone vibrated again. Camilla directly called me on voice. I picked up, but didn't say a word. "Vivian." Her voice was frantic, on the verge of tears. "You finally picked up. What's wrong with you today? Do you even know how dark Ethan's face was after you left? I was worried sick for you. I've got afternoon tea tomorrow with Nathaniel's cousin. I need to get some inside info from Vivian about the Sioux family's Southern City Development Project, where those rich girls won't even bother with me." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone, but my voice was as calm as still water. "I'm fine. I just suddenly didn't feel like confessing." "Why?" Camilla's voice shot up. "You've liked Ethan for so long. Did someone say something to you? Vivian, don't listen to outsiders' nonsense. Ethan, he..." "Camilla," I cut her off, "what time are you meeting Nathaniel's cousin tomorrow?" The other end of the line fell instantly silent. 3 seconds of dead air. Then Camilla let out a dry laugh. How did you know?" I just wanted to help you find out more about Nathaniel. You've always thought he was handsome, haven't you? In both of my lives combined, I've never once said Nathaniel was handsome." "Oh," I replied, "let me know when you find out." After hanging up, I tossed my phone onto the bed, stood up, and walked to the window. Night had already crept in, and outside the courtyard wall stood an old locust tree that rustled whenever the wind blew. Our villa wasn't the largest in this neighborhood, but it was in a prime location, the one Grandpa left to Dad. In my past life, it was this very piece of land, this Southern City Development Project, that was snatched away through a scheme orchestrated by Ethan and Camilla's father's company. My dad was so enraged he had a heart attack and was hospitalized, and my mom's hair turned gray overnight. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the faint mist of weakness at the corners had completely dissipated. On the first day of my rebirth, I tore up the confession letter, uncovered the true faces of Ethan and Camilla, accidentally bumped into Nathaniel, and overheard his unspoken thought, "A little different." The progress was far faster than I had anticipated. I walked over to my desk and sat down, opening my laptop. I created a new document and typed 4 words as the title, "Revenge List." Then I paused and added a line of small text underneath, and "Figure out what's really going on with Nathaniel." The next day was the class reunion. It was the first big group dinner after the college entrance exam, and over 30 people from our class had booked a large private room at a hot pot restaurant next to the school. By the time I arrived, more than half of them were already there. Ethan was sitting near the back, with an empty seat next to him. That seat used to always be mine, but today Camilla was on his left, and the seat on his right was empty. I glanced around, then walked straight to the corner on the opposite side and sat down next to a girl with a ponytail. Her name was Iris. We hadn't interacted much during the 3 years of high school, but I remembered that in my previous life, she had once written me a message in the yearbook, "Vivian, you look beautiful when you smile. Don't always keep your head down." "May I sit here?" I asked. Iris looked up at me, a bit surprised, but nodded nonetheless. "Sure, have a seat." As soon as I sat down, I felt a gaze shooting toward me from across the way. Ethan was looking at me. He was wearing a light blue shirt today, his cuffs meticulously rolled up, still maintaining that gentle, jade-like demeanor. But when I lifted my eyes to meet his, that cold voice rang out again. "Why is she sitting over there? She won't even look at me. What happened last night hasn't been explained yet. I need to find a chance to talk to her alone." I lowered my head, pretending to look at the menu, a faint smile curling at the corners of my mouth. Halfway through the hot pot, Camilla stood up with her drink, beaming as she proposed a toast. She was wearing a white dress today, her long hair flowing over her shoulders. As she spoke, her gaze kept drifting toward the door. I followed her gaze. Just then, the door to the private room swung open, and Nathaniel walked in. The room fell silent for a moment. He was wearing a thin dark gray hoodie, the hood hanging loosely over his back. Tall and lean, he stood there like he had stepped off a magazine cover. Behind him trailed a round-faced girl in a pink hoodie, her hair tied up in a bun. She bounded into the room and called out cheerfully, "Hurry up, bro. I'm starving." That was Nathaniel's cousin, Daisy. One of the targets Camilla had gone to great lengths to curry favor with in her past life. Daisy glanced around, her gaze noticeably cooling when it landed on Camilla, but she still nodded out of politeness. Then she saw me, and her eyes suddenly lit up. "Hey. Vivian? You're here too?" I was taken aback. Daisy and I had barely interacted in my past life, how did she know me? "I saw you from afar at the last charity gala." Daisy had already bounced over to me, casually pulling out a chair and sitting down. "You were wearing a dark green dress that day, it was especially beautiful." She stopped mid-sentence and whipped around to glare at Nathaniel. Nathaniel sat down beside her expressionlessly, picked up his chopsticks, and grabbed a slice of tripe as if nothing had happened. But I clearly heard that line in his mind, when did I say she looked good? I just took a second look. I almost choked on my own drink. Camilla's face was a picture. She stood there with her drink in hand, her toast cut short, forced to watch Daisy chatter away beside me while Nathaniel sat diagonally across from me, eyes lowered as he swished the tripe in the hot pot, every inch of him screaming, "Keep your distance." But she wouldn't give up. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, Camilla happened to walk over carrying a fruit platter and happened to take the empty seat next to Nathaniel, her voice soft as cotton candy. "Nathaniel, want some fruit? This watermelon is really sweet." Nathaniel didn't even look up, no. Camilla froze for a moment, but her smile didn't waver. "Then something to drink?" "I'll get you." "No need." 2 words, cold as ice shards. Camilla's smile finally began to falter, and she awkwardly returned to her seat. Watching from the side, Ethan's eyes flickered with displeasure, but he said nothing. As for me, sitting diagonally across from them, a voice suddenly crept into my ears again. It was Nathaniel's, still as low as ever. "What's Vivian looking at? There's some sesame paste on the corner of her mouth, and she hasn't even wiped it off." I instinctively raised my hand to wipe the corner of my mouth. The tip of my finger touched a bit of sesame paste. I froze. Looking up at Nathaniel, I saw him pick up a piece of tripe he had just cooked, lower his head, and take a bite, his eyelashes casting a small shadow beneath his eyes. That face was as cold as ice, but the warmth of that voice inside my ears made my fingertips tingle slightly. He noticed. Before I even noticed it myself. I set down my chopsticks, picked up my water glass, and took a big gulp. But suddenly Daisy leaned in and whispered, "Vivian, your face is really red. Is the spicy pot too much for you?" Nathaniel's hand seemed to pause midair as he rinsed the tripe. I didn't dare to look. After the party ended, I didn't take the car Camilla called for. Instead, I hailed a Didi home by myself. In the car, I opened my phone. The class group chat was already flooding with messages. Someone had posted the video clip of me tearing up the letter that day. The comments below were divided. Some said, "Vivian is so cool," others said, "Is she crazy or what?" I scrolled through a few messages and then closed it. None of that mattered. What mattered was Ethan. In my previous life, the first thing Ethan did after we got together was to use me to get close to my father, obtaining the first draft of the City South Development Plan, which he then passed on to Camilla's father, Harrison. At that time, Lynn's real estate was just a mid-sized company. By riding this wave, they vaulted directly into the second tier of the capital city. Meanwhile, my family, due to the leak of core business secrets, was besieged by competitors, our capital chain snapped, and in the end, even this villa was mortgaged away. The beginning of all this was when Ethan casually asked me, "Vivian, is your father busy with that project in the south of the city recently? My uncle's company wants to get involved too. Could you help me ask about it?" The naive me nodded dumbly in my past life, and the very next day, I stole the planning document from my father's computer, photographed it, and sent it to him. In this life, I won't fall for this trap again. But I'm going to make them pay, by getting the evidence in my hands before they make their move. I turned on my computer and pulled up the core data from the planning proposal in my past life's memory. The Southern District Development Project was a government-led urban renovation initiative, and the key to winning the bid lay in the environmental assessment report for Plot 3. In my past life, my family received an A-level assessment, but Ethan's family, in order to snatch the bid, forged a C-level report and anonymously reported it, causing our bid to be invalidated. In this life, I wanted to uncover the source of that forged report in advance. And the key people in this matter were Ethan's father, Maxwell, and his company's legal director, Owen. I scrolled through my phone contacts and found a name, Uncle Bernie. A longtime employee of my dad's company, who, in my past life, ran around tirelessly to fight my dad's legal battles after our family went bankrupt, though ultimately failing to turn things around. But for now, he was still one of my dad's most trusted people. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed anyway. Hello? Vivian? Uncle Bernie's voice carried a hint of surprise. It's so late, what made you think of calling your uncle? Uncle Bernie, I lowered my voice. A few days ago, I overheard my father talking about the South City development project. It seems someone's trying to pull something shady. Do you know anyone at Goose Real Estate? Especially a guy named Owen from their legal department. The line went silent for a few seconds. Owen? Uncle Bernie's tone turned serious. How do you know about this person? I've heard some news, saying they're making a fake environmental assessment report. Vivian, you can't just say things like that. Uncle Bernie's voice grew stern. Where did you hear this from? Don't worry about where I heard it, I took a deep breath. Just help me look into one thing, has Owen been privately contacting environmental assessment agencies lately? If so, can you find a way to get the list of agencies he's been in touch with? Another silence. Then Uncle Bernie sighed. You're a handful, kid. Alright, your uncle will make some inquiries for you. But Vivian, a young girl like you should stay out of these adult matters, you hear? I hummed an acknowledgement and hung up, leaning back in my chair as I let out a long breath. Beyond the car window, streetlights zipped past one by one, light and shadow flickering across my face. I closed my eyes, and before me were all the scenes from my past life, the image of my father clutching his chest as he fell, my mother kneeling at the courthouse entrance begging for mercy, and me, standing alone in the rain with my suitcase, unsure of where I was supposed to go. I opened my eyes. On the car window glass was reflected a young face, with what looked like a small flame burning in her eyes. In this life, I wouldn't let anyone climb over me to rise. The phone suddenly buzzed. I looked down, a WeChat friend request. The verification message contained only a name, Nathaniel. My finger hovered over the screen for 2 seconds before I tapped accept. The chat window popped up. He was typing. On and off 5 or 6 times, until finally a message came through. I warned you about the sesame paste on your lips. I stared at that line for a long time. So? I replied. So, you owe me a meal. I couldn't help but laugh out loud at my phone screen. The driver in the front seat glanced at me through the rearview mirror, probably thinking this girl had lost it. I sent him a meme, a cat rolling its eyes. Nathaniel replied instantly, tomorrow noon, Sichuan restaurant at the school's north gate. Why should I go? Because if you don't, I'll send the video of you tearing up the letter to the class group chat. I have that video too. Mine is the high-definition version. I couldn't laugh anymore. How could this person have the high-definition version? That day, he was clearly standing at the corner of the lab building. I was about to press him further when he sent another message, just kidding. Tomorrow at noon. You don't have to come. But I'll be waiting for you. The last 3 words, no expression, no tone, just lying quietly in the chat box. But my breath caught for a moment. The next day at noon, I went. The Northgate Sichuan restaurant wasn't big, but it was clean. I arrived at 12:05. Nathaniel was already sitting by the window, a glass of water in front of him, his phone face down on the table, head turned to look outside. Sunlight slanted in through the glass, falling across half his face. His eyelashes cast a faint shadow on his cheekbone. Today he wore a white t-shirt with a thin denim jacket over it. He didn't look like the legendary aloof young master with his nose in the air, but rather like an ordinary college freshman, if his face weren't so striking. I walked over and sat down across from him. He turned his head, his gaze lingering on my face for a second. I'm late. Traffic jam. You came by subway, line 3, no traffic jams there. You're checking up on me? He didn't answer, pushing the menu toward me. Order. I flipped open the menu and casually marked a few signature dishes. As he handed the menu to the waiter, I noticed his fingers, well-defined knuckles, nails cut short and neat. I caught sight of a watch on his wrist, an understated model, but I'd heard about it from Ethan in my previous life. Word was there were only 3 of that watch in all of Jing City. Seen enough? He suddenly said. I quickly averted my gaze. Who was looking at you? The corner of his mouth seemed to twitch slightly before flattening again. Vivian. What? When you were tearing up the letter yesterday, he paused, did you hear something? My heart suddenly leaped. How could he know? What do you mean? I kept my expression neutral. Nathaniel looked up. His eyes were light in color, a tea brown, and when they fixed on someone, they carried a strange penetrating quality. Before you tore the letter, you glanced at Ethan, then at Camilla, and then you tore it. In that glance, you confirmed something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This person's observation skills were terrifying. What business is it of yours to determine? I picked up my glass and took a sip. It's none of your concern, anyway. He was silent for a few seconds, and then, true, it's none of my concern. but I still want to know. When that voice from the bottom of my heart came through, I was drinking water and nearly choked. I set down the cup, wiped my mouth, and looked up at him. His expression remained indifferent, as if nothing was on his mind. But now I could hear it. When he said that, the tips of his ears were slightly red. A cold-faced judge, thinking I just want to ask, yet what came out was I was reminding you about the sesame paste on your mouth. Using that as an excuse to ask someone out for a meal. I lowered my gaze and suddenly found him a little endearing. The food arrived. Boiled fish, spicy chicken, mapo tofu, all intensely spicy. I picked up a piece of fish with my chopsticks and put it in my mouth. The heat made me gasp, but I couldn't stop. Nathaniel barely ate, he just sat across from me, watching me eat, occasionally taking a sip of water. "Why aren't you eating?" I asked. "I already had lunch." "Then why did you ask me to come out?" He fell silent again. Then I heard him say, "I wanted to watch you eat. Yesterday at the hot pot, you barely touched your chopsticks, too busy watching Camilla put on a show." My chopsticks paused midair. This person was actually paying attention to me. Not like Ethan's purposeful approach, nor Camilla's scheming flattery. He just sat quietly across from me, watching me eat, watching me sniffle from the spice, and then curving his lips ever so slightly. I suddenly felt a bit uneasy. "You." I cleared my throat. "Don't you have class today?" "No." "So what do you usually do?" "Read books, play games, get dragged around everywhere by Daisy." "How come she was at the hot pot place yesterday?" Nathaniel glanced at me. "She heard from Camilla that your class was having a dinner, and insisted on coming. Once she got there, she found Camilla annoying, so she ran over to you when she saw you." I thought of how Daisy plopped herself down next to me yesterday and couldn't help but smile. "She's pretty cute." "Yeah," he paused, "she's cuter than that best friend of yours." I looked up at him. His expression didn't change much, but his tea-brown eyes reflected my shadow. He called Camilla the best friend of yours, his tone flat, but I caught the underlying meaning. He had figured it out on his own, that Camilla was no good. This meal lasted nearly an hour. Midway through, Camilla sent me 5 messages, none of which I replied to. Ethan called, and I hung up and blocked him directly. Nathaniel saw me block him, but didn't ask. When it came time to pay, he insisted on covering the bill. I glared at him and said, "I thought I owed you this one. Next time, it's your treat." He stood up and walked out. I caught up with him. "What do you mean next time? You think there's going to be a next time?" He didn't stop walking, stepping out through the entrance of the Sichuan restaurant. The afternoon sunlight poured down from above, and he turned back to glance at me. In the backlight, his silhouette was edged with a layer of gold, his features hard to make out, but I heard his voice, this time spoken aloud, low, like a feather landing in my ear. "Next time I want to ask you out, do I need a reason?" I stood still, watching his retreating figure as he turned and walked away, my heart beat loud as a drum. Need a reason? No need. Only later did I realize that I had misunderstood. He didn't ask Daisy for my WeChat, she was the one who proactively gave it to him. After receiving it, he waited a full 2 hours before sending a friend request, just to time it right after I got in the car. From beginning to end, he handled everything perfectly. Not overstepping, not pestering, not putting any pressure on you, but the moment you turned around, he was right there. I stood at the entrance of the Sichuan restaurant, the wind lifting the stray strands of hair by my ears, and suddenly felt like this summer wasn't so unbearable after all. For the next 3 days, I focused on 2 things at home. First, compile the key timeline of the previous life South City development case into a document. If my memory serves me right, Maxwell would first contact Owen in mid-August, the falsified report would come out in early September, and the whistleblower letter would be sent to the bidding office in October. There's still time before that happens. Second, study Nathaniel. Alright, the second thing is just a side note. I'm just a little curious. I searched Nathaniel's name online, but the results were completely clean, nothing at all. When I looked up the Zhou group, a bunch of news articles popped up, all financial reports. Nathaniel's father, Quincy, is an invisible tycoon in the Beijing real estate industry, consistently ranked in the top 3 in assets but never making public appearances. Nathaniel is the only son, having just finished his college entrance exams this year. It said he was accepted into the School of Economics and Management at Beijing University. That is to say, he was about to become my college classmate. I closed the webpage and leaned back in my chair. In my previous life at this time, I was sweetly wandering through the mall with Ethan, watching movies, and posting lovey-dovey photos online, completely unaware of everything that was about to come. Now, I'm sitting in my own room. The chirping of cicadas outside the window sounds no different from that past life, but my world has already turned upside down. The phone rang. An unfamiliar number. When I answered, it was Ethan's voice on the other end, low and urgent. "Vivian, why did you block me? Tell me what I did wrong, I can change." I let out a cold laugh. In my past life, I waited 4 years for him to say, I was wrong, only to hear in the end, "Vivian, you're too naive." In this life, he only took 3 days to panic. Since he hasn't gotten his hands on the development plan yet, his father keeps pressing him. And I haven't taken the bait all along, the resource he considered his for the taking is slipping right through his fingers. Ethan, I said in a flat voice, you didn't do anything wrong. I just don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore. It's as simple as that. Impossible. His voice rose. You've liked me for 2 years, how could you just let it go that easily? Did someone say something to you? Was it Nathaniel? I saw you two at the Sichuan restaurant yesterday. What does Nathaniel have to do with it? My voice turned cold. Do you think every girl in the world should revolve around you? I confessed to Vivian, but I can take it back too. Is that not allowed? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the voice from the depths of his heart, more urgent and disordered than ever before. How did she become like this? Camilla said she's been meeting Nathaniel several times recently. No, my dad's waiting for news on the development project. I need to find a way to make her trust me again. I hung up the phone and sent him a text message, don't call again. I don't want to see you before school starts. After sending that, I also blocked his second number. 3 minutes later, Camilla called. Vivian. Why did you block Ethan too? Her voice was urgent and sharp. What's going on between you two? Can't you stop being so willful? She's insane. If Ethan actually gets dumped by her, how will I use her to get close to the Zhou family? I invited Daisy for coffee yesterday, and that girl kept her head down playing on her phone the whole time, ignoring me. If Vivian stops being my stepping stone, all the connections I painstakingly built up will be wasted. I listened quietly, waiting for her to finish before speaking softly. Camilla, since you're so worried about Ethan, why don't you just get together with him? Camilla's voice came to an abrupt halt. What are you talking about? What I like is. I know what type you like, I said with a smile. Cold and quiet, with the last name Zhou preferably. Camilla, keep at it, I wish you the best. After hanging up, I tossed my phone aside and let out a long sigh while staring at the ceiling. Those 2 phone calls had expelled about 1/10 of the pent-up frustration I'd carried from my past life. As for the remaining 9/10, I'd take my time with them. My WeChat buzzed. Nathaniel, free this afternoon? What's up? Daisy wants to see you. Doesn't she have her own phone? She wants to go shopping and asked me to find someone to go with her. I can't be bothered. So you're asking me to go? I want you to go in my place. I stared at the message and suddenly found it amusing. The way this person asked people out was always bizarre, but somehow it worked every time. All right, I replied. What time? Where do we meet? 3 p.m., Gateway of Guamao. She'll be wearing a pink hoodie. You'll recognize her. And you? I'll be sleeping at home. Nathaniel, that's too much. Get up and I'll pick you up for dinner. That's more like it. I put down my phone, got out of bed, and changed clothes. I rummaged through the wardrobe and finally picked a simple white t-shirt paired with denim shorts, tying my hair into a high ponytail. While looking in the mirror, I suddenly noticed that the corners of my mouth were lifted. I froze for a second. Then I said to myself in the mirror, Vivian, don't fall too fast. Wasn't the lesson from the last life enough? But the girl in the mirror laughed with her eyes curved, not listening at all. At the entrance of Building A, Guamao, Daisy showed up right on time. Pink hoodie, a bun on her head, she waved as soon as she spotted me from afar. Vivian. Over here. I walked over, and she grabbed my arm, yanking me with a strength that felt like she meant to drag me away. Come on, come on. A new milk tea shop just opened on the first floor, it's amazing. Pulled along, I could only laugh helplessly. Your brother said you insisted on going shopping. He's lying to you. Daisy turned back and winked at me. My brother actually wanted to see you, but he was too shy to say it, so he made me the excuse. Vivian, don't tell him I ratted him out. My footsteps faltered for a moment. Vivian, let me tell you a secret, Daisy said, pulling me into the milk tea shop. She ordered 2 cups of Yangji Ganlu and led me to a corner seat. Leaning in, she lowered her voice. My brother has never taken the initiative to ask a girl out. You're the first one. I stirred the grapefruit chunks in my cup, saying nothing. Daisy continued, he's the type that looks cold on the surface, but deep down he's actually really nice. It's just that he's terrible with words, never willing to say anything directly. Last time he asked who Vivian was, and I told him you were the Sue family's daughter. He didn't press further after that. But later, when I went to your class dinner, he insisted on tagging along, saying he was worried I'd be bored alone. Who'd believe that? I took a sip of the mango pomelo sago, sweet and sour, somewhat matching my mood right now. But Vivian, he'd actually seen you before. Daisy suddenly recalled something. Last year's charity gala, you were alone by the garden feeding stray cats, and my brother happened to see you while passing by. He came back and told me, that Sue family daughter, she's kind of interesting. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I look back, he remembered you from that moment. My fingers, holding the straw, froze. Charity gala. Last autumn. I was indeed crouched in a corner of the garden, feeding a scrawny orange cat. The wind was strong that day, and I wasn't wearing enough, I was shivering from the cold. But I don't recall anyone passing by. So he was already there back then. Vivian, Daisy suddenly turned serious. Did you and Ethan have a fight? I heard you tore up his letter that day. No fight, I set down my cup. I just don't want to be with him anymore. Daisy's eyes lit up. Then, what do you think of my brother? I choked on my drink. Daisy, I wiped my mouth, are you trying to play matchmaker? No, not at all, she quickly waved her hands. I just think you two would be a good match. My brother, you see, has very high standards, but the way he looks at you is different. Different how? Daisy tilted her head, thinking for a moment. When he looks at you, there's a light in his eyes. When he looks at others, it's like looking at thin air. I didn't say anything, but my fingers lightly tapped twice against the side of the cup. Daisy sighed again, but I get it too. After all, Ethan has been chasing you for so long. Hey Vivian, don't you think Camilla has been acting weird lately? She asked me out for coffee yesterday and kept asking about you. She even asked if my brother had been in touch with you. I know, I said. I can't be bothered with her, Daisy rolled her eyes. I've seen plenty of her type, thinks putting on a white dress and some makeup is enough to get into our circle. She should take a good look at her own background. I just smiled and said nothing. We shopped until 5:30, when Nathaniel showed up punctually at the milk tea shop door. He had changed into a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking even sharper than at noon. The moment Daisy saw him, she shot up like a rabbit spotting a hawk. Bro. Perfect timing, Vivian and I are starving from all the shopping, you're treating us to dinner. Nathaniel glanced at me. I was holding a half-empty cup of mango pomelo sago, sitting in the corner, feeling a bit uncomfortable under his gaze. Then I heard him think to himself, white tee, high ponytail. Prettier than yesterday. I nearly bit through my straw. During the meal, Daisy chattered away about a bunch of school gossip. Nathaniel and I sat across from each other, occasionally meeting each other's eyes, then looking away again. On my way to the restroom, I ran into Nathaniel at the corner of the hallway. He was leaning against the wall, phone in hand, as if waiting for me. What's up? I stopped. He looked at me for a moment, then said, Ethan came to see me today. I frowned. What for? He asked me if I was chasing you. What did you say? I said, he paused, none of your business. I couldn't help but laugh, that's it? Why not? He put away his phone and took 2 steps forward until he was standing right in front of me. The distance suddenly closed, and I could smell the faint scent of cedar on him, blending with the steaming hot pot from the restaurant, creating a strange kind of warmth. He looked down at me, his voice soft, Vivian, if you're not ready yet, I can wait. But if you are, don't let anyone cut in line ahead of me. He left after saying that. I stood there, my back pressed against the cold, tiled wall, my heart pounding so wildly I felt like it might flip me over entirely. Nathaniel. How could he be like this? Saying the most provocative things in the most casual tone. Then walking away, leaving you no time to respond, forcing you to stand there alone, digesting those words, turning them over and over in your mind. I stood there for a full 2 minutes before finally straightening up from the wall. My phone buzzed, a WeChat message from Nathaniel, come eat, the food is getting cold. I replied with a single word, okay. But it took me several attempts to send that okay, because my fingers wouldn't stop trembling. In early August, Uncle Bernie called me back. Vivian, about what you mentioned last time, I found something. His voice was very low. Owen did get in touch with someone from watching appraisal. He arranged 2 dinner meetings at the end of last month. I had someone obtain surveillance screenshots from their meeting. Though we can't hear what was said, the timing is indeed suspicious. I gripped my phone tightly. Can you send me the screenshots? I can send them to you, but don't do anything rash. I've already tested the waters with your father. He still trusts the Gu family, so I can't directly say anything. You're just a child. Uncle Bernie, don't worry. I know how to handle myself. After hanging up the phone, Uncle Bernie sent over the screenshots. 2 surveillance photos from the restaurant, timestamps clear, showing Owen sitting across from a middle-aged man in a suit, with a stack of documents spread out in front of him. I zoomed in and stared at it for a long time, then saved it into an encrypted folder. This was only the first piece of evidence. In my past life, the forged environmental assessment report would eventually be submitted to the bid office. If I could get my hands on the original copy of that report, combined with evidence of Owen's contact with the assessment agency, that would form a complete whistleblowing chain. But the problem was, the original should still be in Maxwell's hands. I went over the timeline from my past life. As far as I could recall, Maxwell would receive the final draft in early September, then make 3 copies, 1 for his records, 1 for the bid office, and 1 for Camilla's father, Harrison. Harrison might be a breakthrough. I opened WeChat and found a name, Camilla's cousin, Rebecca. In my past life, Rebecca and Harrison had an average relationship, but she worked in administration at Lynn's real estate and occasionally had access to certain documents. More importantly, Rebecca had once approached me privately in that previous life, hinting that she had some things on Harrison, but she didn't elaborate at the time, and I didn't pay it much attention. In the end, it just fizzled out. This time, I decided to reach out to her early. I sent Rebecca a message. "Rebecca, long time no see. How have you been?" Rebecca replied quickly, "Vivian? Why are you suddenly looking for me? How are you and your parents doing?" After a few pleasantries, I changed the subject. "Rebecca, I heard your dad's company is recently collaborating with the Gu family on a project? The one in the south of the city?" There was a moment of silence on the other end. "How did you find out?" "I happened to overhear my dad mention it." "Rebecca, I have a somewhat unreasonable request. Could you keep an eye out to see if your dad's side has received an environmental assessment report? If so, could you secretly take a photo and send it to me?" "Vivian, what are you planning to do?" I chose my words carefully. "I suspect something is off with that report. I have some evidence, but it needs verification. Don't worry, I won't drag you into this. You just need to check if such a document exists." Another silence. Then Rebecca replied, "I'll try, but I can't promise anything." I thanked her and put down my phone. This move is risky, but if it succeeds, I'll get first-hand evidence of Maxwell and Harrison's conspiracy. Then I'll lay the evidence before my father, and no matter how foolish he is, he won't reveal the core documents of the development project to the Gu family. As for Ethan, he's been unusually quiet lately. Ever since I blocked him last time, he hasn't called from another number, nor has he shown up near my house. But I know he won't give up. The stakes of the South City development project are just too high. Sure enough, on the night of August 15th, Ethan's mother called my mom. I overheard it. Mrs. Miranda said in her usual gentle and proper tone, "Our Ethan has been a bit down lately. I heard he had some minor disagreement with Vivian." "Oh, we adults shouldn't meddle in children's affairs, but Ethan really likes Vivian. He talks about her every day at home." After my mom hung up the phone, she came to knock on my door. "Vivian, what happened between you and Ethan? Mrs. Miranda said you two had a falling out?" I sat at my desk and turned to look at my mom's gentle face. In my past life, she had worn herself out worrying about me, and later, when my family fell apart and we lost everything, her hair turned white overnight. Now, looking at her still glossy black hair and the faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, a sharp ache suddenly rose in my chest. "Mom," I said, "I don't want to be with Ethan anymore." My mom froze for a moment. "Why? Haven't you always liked him?" "I've seen some things clearly," I said, walking over to take her hand. "Trust me on this one. The Gu family isn't good. The reason they've been keeping in touch with us is because of the development project." My mom's expression shifted. Having been in the business world herself, she understood right away with just a few words. She was silent for a few seconds, then patted my hand. "All right, I understand. Leave your father to me." My eyes burned and I almost broke down in tears, but I held it in. In my past life, my mom kept saying to me during her final days, "Vivian, I'm sorry I let you down, for not seeing those people sooner." In this life, I would make sure she saw clearly, while there was still time. At the end of August, a week before the university term started, Camilla asked me out to have a talk. She chose the cafe we used to frequent. By the time I arrived, she was already seated, wearing a champagne-colored dress, her hair styled in big curls, makeup so meticulous it didn't seem like she was just out for a cup of coffee. I sat down, and she had ordered a caramel macchiato for me, sliding it over with a beaming smile. "Vivian, it's been so long. You haven't been replying to my messages lately. I've missed you so much." I picked up the cup, took a sip, and said nothing. Camilla kept up the act. "What really happened between you and Ethan? He's lost so much weight these past few days, it breaks my heart just looking at him. You two have been together for 2 years, don't let a little thing tear you apart like this." I have to get her to spill today. Daisy has completely shut me out, and Ethan's father keeps pushing. If I lose this lead with Vivian, my dad will tear me apart. If all else fails, I'll use that photo from last year to force her hand. That photo from last year. My fingers paused for a moment. Camilla kept on rambling. "Vivian, if something's on your mind, you can tell me. I'm your best friend." I set down my cup and lifted my gaze to meet Camilla's eyes. That face was still as delicate as ever, that smile still as sweet. 2 lifetimes, and for the first time, I realized how blind I had been. Every subtle calculation in her eyes, every fleeting glint of smugness, I had mistaken them all for what's best for me. "Camilla," I spoke up, cutting her off, "you took pictures of me on your birthday last year, didn't you?" Camilla's smile froze for a split second. "What picture?" She gave a dry laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about." "That picture of me passed out on the table after drinking," I said, looking her straight in the eye, word by word. "When are you planning to use it to threaten me?" Camilla's face changed. She opened her mouth as if to say something. I didn't give her the chance. "You don't need to explain. But Camilla, is everything on your phone really that clean? You tried to force me to back down with that picture today, and tomorrow I can have your chat logs and transfer screenshots synced from the cloud to your hard drive, and then accidentally share them. Want to try? Camilla's face turned pale instantly. She had indeed saved many things and deleted many things, but she might not have remembered to turn off cloud synchronization. You. Her voice trembled. Vivian, when did you become so? So what? I stood up, looking down at her from above. Camilla, I gave you a chance. Last winter when you had a cold and fever, I ran 2 blocks in the middle of the night to buy you medicine. When you argued with your mom and had nowhere to go, you stayed at my place for 2 whole weeks. Do you remember any of that? Camilla looked away. You don't remember, I said softly. You only remember that I'm useful to you. I turned and walked out of the cafe. The moment the sunlight hit my face, I heard a voice from behind me. It was Camilla's inner thoughts, anxious and bitter. How does she know? When did she dig up all those old scores behind my back? It's over, I can't post the photos now. If I do, she'll really spill all those things. I walked to the curb and hailed a taxi. Only after I sat down in the back seat did I let out a long breath. The streetscape outside the window receded. I leaned back against the seat and suddenly felt exhausted. Living a second life, every day was spent calculating, being wary, laying out plans, even having a cup of coffee with a friend meant keeping my guard up at every turn. My phone buzzed. Nathaniel, where are you? I replied, just finished coffee with Camilla, on my way back. She didn't bully you, did she? I looked at the message and smiled. What could she possibly bully me about? Hard to say. You look smart, but you're actually soft-hearted. I stared at the words, too soft-hearted, for a long time. He was right. In my past life, I was too soft-hearted, too easily moved by others' surface-level tenderness. That was exactly what led to my downfall. This time around, I thought I had become tough enough, but every time I answer my mom's call, every time I see Nathaniel standing there waiting for me, my heart still softens. Nathaniel, I replied, why are you so kind to me? The other side was silent for nearly a minute. Then he replied, because you're worth it. 4 words. No embellishments, no build-up, just lying there, bare and raw in the chat window. I stared at those 4 words, my eyes stinging a little, but this time the tears didn't fall. I pressed my phone against my chest, feeling the heavy weight of that, because you're worth it. This summer, I lost Ethan and Camilla, lost an entire circle I had believed was unshakable. But it seemed I had gained something else instead. On September 1st, Jingda University started its new semester. On registration day, I wore a light blue shirt dress, tucked my hair behind my ears, and put on a bit of makeup. Before I left, my mom stared at me for a long time and then suddenly said, Vivian, you seem different lately. Different how? Your eyes, she reached out and touched my head, they used to be timid, but now they're so bright. I smiled without saying a word, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and walked out the door. The freshman registration point for the School of Economics and Management at Jing University was set up at the entrance of the library. By the time I got there, a long line had already formed. Standing in the queue, I looked down at my phone, catching a glimpse of a familiar figure approaching from the diagonal behind me. Ethan. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt and black trousers, his hair meticulously styled, holding registration materials in his hand, with a perfectly measured gentle smile on his face. A guy walked beside him, and the two chatted as they went. The moment he saw me, Ethan's steps came to a noticeable halt. His gaze lingered on me for half a second, then he walked over with a smile. Vivian, what a coincidence. You're here to check in too? She looks really good today. I have to take advantage of the start of the semester to smooth things over. I can't let her keep avoiding me anymore. I stepped half a step back. Yeah. Which class are you in? He leaned in a little closer, his voice soft and gentle. I checked the roster, we might not be in the same class, but that's okay, we can still run into each other during lessons. Ethan, I cut him off, stay away from me. A few classmates nearby turned to look at us. Ethan's smile froze on his face, but he quickly composed himself and let out a bitter laugh. Vivian, I know you're still angry, but let me explain. Annoying, with all these people watching, can't she just save me some face? Once I get the development project, who's going to put up with her anyway? I was about to sidestep him when a voice came from behind, Vivian. I turned around. Nathaniel stood 3 steps away, wearing a black polo shirt today with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked no different from any ordinary freshman, if you ignored his face, that is. He walked over, stood beside me as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and glanced down at Ethan. He said nothing. But from that look alone, I could already hear his words echoing in my mind, take your hand off. Ethan's hand was still suspended mid-air, having just attempted to grab my wrist. Under Nathaniel's piercing gaze, he awkwardly withdrew it. Nathaniel, Ethan's voice carried a hint of barely perceptible tension, you two, know each other? Classmates, Nathaniel said in a flat tone, then turned to me. The registration forms are over there. Let's go. I nodded and followed him as he walked away. After a few steps, I lowered my voice and said, "Thanks." "No need to thank me," his voice was low too. "I was coming to find you anyway." "How did you know I'd be here?" "You mentioned yesterday that you were reporting in today." "I did say that, but I never told you what time I'd be here." Nathaniel tilted his head to look at me. I guessed. As we walked side by side, I noticed he would deliberately slow his pace by half a beat to match mine. It was a subtle movement, impossible to detect without paying attention. But now I noticed it. After picking up the materials, taking the ID photo, and completing the dormitory procedures, we parted ways at the entrance of the teaching building. He lived in the East Zone, I lived in the West Zone, with the entire campus between us. Just before leaving, he suddenly called out to me. "Vivian." "If Ethan comes looking for you again," he paused, "just call me." "Call you for what?" "Just call me, and I'll come." With that, he walked away, his silhouette stretched long and straight in the September sunlight. I stood rooted to the spot, watching his figure disappear at the end of the tree-lined path, and suddenly felt that this autumn might just be the best season I've had in 2 lifetimes. The afternoon opening ceremony was held in the gymnasium. I found a seat near the edge and sat down. Next to me was Iris, she had somehow ended up in the same class as me. We exchanged a few words, and the atmosphere between us felt much more natural than before. Halfway through the ceremony, Camilla suddenly squeezed over from the back row and sat down beside me. "Vivian," she whispered, a flattering smile on her face, "how was registration today? Our dorms are on the same floor. Now we can hang out together again." This morning, Ethan said she's been getting close to Nathaniel. Could someone like Nathaniel really take an interest in her? What does she have besides her family background? But if she actually ends up with Nathaniel, then I'd have to suck up to her even more. I turned my head and looked at Camilla's face, which was practically plastered with sincerity, and suddenly found it amusing. "Camilla," I said in a voice only the two of us could hear, "you don't have to act so hard. It's exhausting just to watch." Camilla's smile cracked. "Don't come looking for me anymore," I said flatly. "We're not friends anymore." Camilla's face flushed red and then pale, and finally she stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly, drawing the attention of several people who turned to look at her. She gritted her teeth and squeezed out a sentence, "Vivian, you'll regret this." I smiled and waved my hand at her. Regret? I regretted it for 4 years in my past life. In this life, I won't. In the second week of the semester, Rebecca sent me a message. "Vivian, I found what you mentioned last time." Attached was a photo of the cover of a document, environmental assessment report, issued by Watching Evaluation, dated last month. But I took a look at the content, and the data is different from the one in our company's internal archive. I enlarged the photo to examine it closely, the report number, the evaluator's seal, and the date all matched. This was the very forged report from my past life. "Rebecca," I typed, "could you send me the entire document? Just the pages with the key data will do." "Okay, I'll take the photos tonight when I get back. But Vivian, promise me you won't blow this up, I can't afford the consequences on my end." "Don't worry, I'm only taking this file to keep my family from being cheated. I won't drag you into it." That evening, Rebecca sent over the key pages. I cross-checked them against the timeline and chain of evidence I had compiled myself, the surveillance screenshots Uncle Bernie had provided, the key data from the forged report Rebecca had supplied, plus the exact time Maxwell had submitted the whistleblowing letter from my past life memory. Only the final step remained, obtaining the post office record of when the letter was sent. For this step, I decided to have my father step in. On Friday night, I went home for dinner and, over the meal, laid out the materials I had prepared in front of my parents. My dad frowned and flipped through the pages for a long time, his face growing darker by the moment. "Vivian, where did you get all this?" "Dad, don't worry about where I got it," I said, holding his gaze. "You just need to know that Maxwell is planning to use this fake environmental report to set us up. If I'm right, in about half a month, a whistleblower letter will end up at the bidding office. Then our bid gets disqualified, and you know better than I do who'll end up with plot number 3. My father was silent for a long time. Then he closed the folder and let out a long breath. "Vivian, you've grown up." "Dad, do you trust me?" He looked at me, a mix of relief and shock in his eyes. "I do. If this document is real, Maxwell is trying to take me down. Don't worry, Dad knows what to do." I let out a sigh. The weight that had been pressing on my heart for 2 months finally eased a little. As I walked out of the study, my mother was standing at the door, her eyes red-rimmed. She reached out and hugged me without saying a word, but the strength in that embrace told me, she believed me, through and through. I went back to my room, flopped onto the bed, and sent Nathaniel a message. I came clean with my dad. How did it go? He believed me. That's good. Then he sent another message, "Your dad is 10,000 times better than Ethan." I smiled when I saw the message. "Why do you compare everything to Ethan?" "Because he's useless." "Can you do it?" "Whether I can do it or not, you'll find out when you try." I stared at that line of text for 3 seconds, then suddenly realized what he meant, and my whole face flushed bright red. Nathaniel. You. Just kidding. You'd better be kidding. Well, just kidding. But you're blushing. How do you know I'm blushing? Just a guess. I flipped my phone face down on the bed, unable to suppress the smile curling up at the corners of my mouth. In October, the day before the bidding results for the South City Development Project were announced, the tendering office received an anonymous tip-off letter accusing one of the bidders of forging environmental assessment reports. But this time, the reported party wasn't the Sue family. It was Goose Real Estate. My father submitted the forged report evidence and the surveillance screenshots of Owen contacting the evaluation agency to the bidding office in advance, and also called the police. After the police intervened and investigated, they traced the trail to uncover the financial dealings between Owen and the watching evaluators, as well as the entire process of Maxwell instructing the forgery of documents. Goose Real Estate's bidding qualification was revoked, and Maxwell was taken in for investigation. The day the news broke, I was studying in the library when Iris rushed over and shoved her phone in front of me. Vivian, look. Ethan's dad got arrested. I glanced at the news headline, hummed an acknowledgement, and continued reading my book. Iris stared wide-eyed. That's your reaction? Ethan was someone you used to like. I turned a page of my book. What does it have to do with me? On the way back to the dorm that evening, I got a call from Ethan. He called from a new number, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't slept in days. Vivian, it was you, wasn't it? You set my dad up. Ethan, I cut him off. Get it straight. Your dad was the one who forged the report. I just handed over the evidence. That's called reporting, not setting him up. He sputtered, too furious to speak. Just you wait. I'm not waiting, I said calmly. Don't contact me anymore. Your family matters have nothing to do with me, and we won't have any connection from now on. I hung up the phone and blocked the number. Walking along the tree-lined path, the October night breeze had already turned chilly, brushing pleasantly against my face. I looked up at the sky, there were many stars tonight. Tomorrow should be a clear day. My phone rang again. It was Nathaniel. Where are you? On my way back to the dorm. Wait for me. I didn't reply, but I slowed down. After walking over 100 meters, I heard footsteps behind me, and then a coat was draped over my head, carrying the familiar scent of cedarwood. I turned around. Nathaniel stood under the streetlight, wearing a long-sleeved sweatshirt. His coat hung over my shoulders, too big for me, the sleeves far too long. Cold, he said. If you're cold, just put it back on. It was for you to wear. I tugged at the collar of the jacket and didn't refuse any further. The two of us walked side by side, the streetlight stretching our shadows long, one tall, one short, standing close together. After walking for a while, I spoke up. You know everything? Yeah, he said, turning his head to look at me. Your dad talked to my dad on the phone. Didn't your father say anything? He said, Nathaniel paused, that the Sue family's daughter is formidable. I let out a laugh. Your dad isn't very creative with his compliments. I think so too. When we reached the dormitory building, I took off my jacket and handed it back to him. As he took it, his fingertips brushed against mine, cold, yet the touch in that instant was so warm it made my heart race. I turned to leave, but he called out from behind me. Vivian. I looked back. He stood under the streetlight, the cold, sharp lines of his face softened by the warm yellow glow. His eyes met mine, and his voice, neither too loud nor too soft, was carried to my ears by the night breeze. You asked me before why I'm so good to you. I held my breath. The day you tore up the letter, I was standing at the corner, watching you scatter the pieces onto the ground. Your eyes were red, but you gave a small smile. Later, I remembered, last year at the charity gala, you were feeding a cat in the garden. The wind was strong, and you were crouched there, curled up, talking to the cat in a very soft voice. He paused for a moment. I thought to myself back then, I never want to see this girl smile with red eyes again. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but in the end, I only managed to say, then make sure you keep your word. My voice was hoarse. But I didn't let the tears fall. As long as it takes, he said. As long as it's you. I stood there watching him for a long time, then walked over to him. I looked up at him and finally smiled. That smile was faint, but I saw it, his tea-brown eyes reflected me, and behind me, the myriad lights of the city. In this life, I was reborn with only vengeance in mind. But I never expected that on this path of revenge, I would meet someone like him. He was like the first autumn breeze after summer ended, neither cold nor hot, just right. Just right to blow me back, little by little, from the ruins of my past life.